evening, everybody. Good evening and welcome to the Veterans Breakfast Club. My name is Todd DiPastino, and I am the Executive Director of the Veterans Breakfast Club. We're a nonprofit based in Pittsburgh, PA. We've been around since 2008, and our mission is to hold events where veterans get together and share their stories. Tonight is the 80th anniversary of the creation of the Army Security Agency. The Army Security Agency was created. We've been doing a lot of 80th anniversary programs about the end of World War II. Tonight, we're doing an 80th anniversary program about the beginning of something. And it would make sense that the ASA, the Army Security Agency, would be born in the wake of World War II as this new thing called the Cold War was just beginning. And the ASA, the Army Security Agency, would play a really important role in the Cold War. But because the mission of the ASA was top secret, because it was so classified and so few people knew anything about it, their stories, the veterans who served in the Army Security Agency, have not been well told. And so we thought we would devote tonight, and I think we're going to have to devote another night to having veterans of the ASA join us and start sharing their stories. For those of you who are with the Veterans Breakfast Club for the first time, once again, I'm Todd. We have been holding veteran storytelling programs, mostly at breakfast. That's why we're the Veterans Breakfast Club, mostly in person, for 17 years. And now we're doing them online. And it's wonderful because we're able to reach so many veterans from across the country and have these 90-minute conversations. We're having another anniversary. If you've been with the Veterans Breakfast Club for a while, you know that we love these anniversary programs. And we have another anniversary coming up on Thursday night. It'll be the anniversary of the Air Force's birthday. So we're going to focus on the Air Force birthday. That'll be Thursday night at 7 p.m. right here at the same Zoom address. And I also want to let people know that in addition to our online programs, our in-person programs that we have, and we end up having about 40 of them a year, mostly in Western Pennsylvania, but also in Eastern Pennsylvania and Eastern Ohio and elsewhere. In addition to these programs, we also publish a quarterly magazine. And our fall magazine just went to the printer on Friday. No, it was on Tuesday. It was last week, last Friday. And here it is. The theme is coming home after war. We're using the story of the Odyssey or Odysseus, which was one of the first books in history written by Homer, ancient Greece, over 2,000 years ago. And it's amazing how relevant that story is to the experience, I think, of both coming home from war and separating from the military. So we send this magazine out to 12,000 households. If you don't get it, it's because we don't have your address. We send it free of charge. Would love to have you receive it. If you'd like, let me know. You can simply send me an email. You can put a note here in the chat, and we'll make sure that you get the magazine in the mail. We also distribute a lot of them by hand. We send out boxes of 50 or 100 to people who have American Legions that they visit, or libraries, or they're going to an event and they table an event and have them out on the table. This is the marketing that we do, and this is how people find out about the Veterans Breakfast Club. So you'd be doing us a favor if you asked me to send you 25 or 50 or 100 or even one. So please do let me know if you're interested in receiving it. But I want to get to our veterans, and we have a great number of veterans here. Of ASA veterans, and I know only a few of them. Joe Adams, you've been coming to our events for a while. Lonnie Long is the author of this wonderful book, The Definitive History of the ASA in Vietnam, called Unlikely Warriors. He was connected with us by John Peart. Thank you, John, for doing that. And we have Tony Talek, who also has joined our in-person events, William Mears, Paul Jessic, Vern Grunka. We have Bill Blockhus Morgan, we have Dick Snyder, William Luker. I'm guessing, and I could be, Jerry Freed. Hi, Jerry. Thank you for joining us. Some shady character named Gator, I think might be an ASA veteran. I'm guessing. Tom Richardson, I'm guessing is a ASA veteran. Ed Sterling, I'm guessing is one. So Gary McCone, you might be one. I'll be very interested. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, if you want to, I'm going to try to get to as many stories as we can tonight. And we're going to have to do it part two because this is a bigger story than I anticipated. So we're going to schedule a part two. I will let you know. It's probably going to have to be in early 2026 because our schedule is full through the end of the year. But I thought we'd start the conversation with Lonnie because Lonnie is not only a veteran of the Army Security Agency, which, by the way, was all about signal intelligence, human intelligence, electronic intelligence. Lonnie is not only a veteran of the ASA, he's also the historian of the ASA. So Lonnie, could you give us just a brief kind of summary of the history of the Army Security Agency? What was it, and what did it do?
It came into being in 1945 at the end of World War II. And it was a result of the uh, intercept work done during the Second World War and the decryption done at Bletchley Park by the Brits and the US and also by the Navy, who early on broke the diplomatic code of the Japanese, but later broke the naval code as well. And it was probably unique in the annals of military because headquartered at Arlington Hall, it was part of the Army, but it was not part of the Army. It was a stovepipe of the Army. We had our own personnel. We had our own supply area. And the mission at that time was to contain Russia and China. And for example, for Russian monitoring stations, we were in the Aleutian Islands, we were in Ethiopia, Turkey, Germany, and Great Britain. To contain the Chinese, we were in Japan, Korea, Okinawa, Taiwan, and Thailand, Philippines. And our mission was to intercept their military as well as other messaging, mostly sent by Morse code. We did have linguists too, as well. For example, when I first got to Taiwan, I worked an Air Force position. That's where I met Gary, my co-author, and he's been a friend for 60 years. He was a Chinese linguist, kid that graduated from high school with 8 people in his class in Iowa and got sent to Yale University for Chinese. And that was kind of typical of ASA. Recruiters loved you if you had a year of college or you graduated from college or you tested out high enough. And so it was really unique. Everyone that was in ASA had a top secret crypto clearance. And as a sergeant told me one time, everybody does what we're doing, but nobody knows how good we are at it. And we were.
And I'm sorry, you got into the ASA because you had 1 year at Wake Forest under your belt?
Yes. And I really should say I had a year. I forgot to read books and attend class.
But you were technically enrolled at Wake Forest.
Yes, I was.
Okay.
I had a great year at Wake Forest.
Yes, you had too much fun at Wake Forest.
Yes.
So it was time for the Army for you.
So I went down to Charlotte from Statesville area, and the recruiter found out I had a year of college. He gave me a battery of tests and said, good luck, son, you're in the ASA.
And you never graduated basic training.
That's true.
They took you right out of basic training.
Well, they pulled us out of basic training because of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh.
So the Cuban Missile Crisis hit. We were on a bivouac, a long march. And when we came back in, got cleaned up, all went to bed. And in the middle of the night, they woke up 14 of us out of about 200 that were going to ASA and put us on a train in Columbia, South Carolina. And we headed to Fort Devens, Massachusetts, in Boston.
And how many years did you spend in the Army?
3 years. The 4-year enlistment came later.
Okay, that came later.
ASA.
So
yes.
in order to get into the ASA later, you had to commit to 4 years in the Army.
Correct.
And why was that?
Because of the length of the training.
Yeah. Yeah. They were going to invest in you. They wanted to make sure they had you
Yes,
for a while.
exactly.
Right. Right. Let me go to Bill Blockus Morgan because you're another ASA veteran. You served in the 1970s in the Army Security Agency. If you could unmute, we could have you talk a little bit about your own service, and then also you're another historian who knows a lot about the history of the ASA, and you're working and being a technical advisor and historian for a documentary that's being made in production about the Army Security Agency. Let me ask you, how did you get into the ASA?
I was I had been a Navy midshipman at University of Jacksonville University in Florida, and essentially I decided after weathering a hurricane at sea, I wasn't exactly thrilled with the idea of naval service, and so I was returning my ROTC uniforms to the AFE Center, and ASA guy walks up to me and he says, "You got time to talk?" And he says, "You ever spoke a foreign language?" And I had 5 years of Latin, which is the only person you could speak to is the Pope. But essentially, he showed me a film, a guy hopping out of a sedan with a briefcase, uh, handcuffed to his wrist, and he says, "You too could join ASA." And then the second mistake was I still remember my recruiter's name. He's the only one I remember. His name was Sergeant First Class Wilmer Bobo, and he said, "For 3 years, we can pick a language for you: Urdu, Amharic, Tagalog, Farsi. But if you come in for 4 years, you can learn German, Russian, French, Spanish, or one of those languages." And of course, I said, "What's a year here or there?" And so I
Yeah.
joined for the 4 years an attended language school in Washington, D.C.
And what now inspires you to work so hard to preserve this history or record this history and for others to learn it? So you're working on a film.
Well, I've done a lot of research on intelligence history. I made a career of military intelligence after ASA and spent 44 years with the Army, either as an officer. I started out enlisted, but I became an officer. So I spent about 44 years as an officer and a senior civilian. And then I got into what was called the Military Corps Association, and our responsibility was preserving the heritage of Army intelligence. And so I started writing articles for that, but then I started wanting to know more about ASA, but everything was restricted by NSA. And a lot of it wasn't released until the late 2013, 2015 timeframe. And so I ran into people like Bill Luker and others, and they were all wanting to know more about their history. I put together an insignia collection for the Army intelligence, and then people wanted to have commemorative art, and so I got into that. But essentially, it was just a curiosity for an unknown.
Yeah. Yeah. Here is, I think, the patch. I think this is the official patch, I believe, of the Army Security Agency. And these are like an eagle's talon grasping thunderbolts
Right.
representing electronics and capturing signals.
Yes.
And then, Bill, you came up with this graphic. We were never there.
Right. And essentially, if you look at the shoulder sleeve insignia and the unit distinguished unit or distinctive unit insignia, you'll notice they're derived from the ASA seal, which was first designed in 1946 and appeared in a fiscal year report for 1946. And it was a pen and ink sketch by someone, and I haven't found out who. But then the eagle's talon holding the lightning bolts derived from the eagle on the seal. And the globe underneath the eagle is where the vigilant always came because it was a global mission.
Right, right. And all these ribbons, do they represent the different campaigns, the different wars, the different, uh, the geography of the ASA?
What they represent on the left-hand side under the distinctive unit insignia, they represent unit citations for the service in 27 wars and 17 political and military crises. What you see on the right are the service medals that were earned by members of ASA during the Cold War, everything from Berlin occupation, national defense, Korea, Vietnam. You also have the Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal, which was earned, and that was our last conflict effort, and that was in Dominican Republic. And then from there, gallantry ribbons that were given by the countries that we were fighting for or fighting in.
People might not be able to read what's at the bottom, so I'm going to read it. ASA veterans know the challenges, hardships, determination, dedication, and courage it took to accomplish the mission in 2 wars, 27 campaigns, and 17 political and military crises. An elite Army intelligence organization, its symbols were a mystery to most. The unit citations and service ribbons were those received by its veterans for unit actions and individual service during the Cold War. From September 15th, 1945 to January 1st, 1977, they were the warriors in the shadows, the forgotten. Can I ask you, Bill, why was the Army Security Agency folded into other intelligence agencies in 1977?
There was a there was a study that was done by Major General Urzano, and the goal from the very beginning was to bring ASA back because after the Vietnam War, Army was short on funding and ASA was getting a major separate portion of funding. But the Urzano had a predetermined destination by the chief of the staff of the Army to fold them back in. And of course, when you look at our experience in war in Vietnam and Korea, they were operating as a semi-autonomous organization within an organization and didn't answer to the commanders on the ground. And by forming an organization like the Intel and Security Command, then they brought ASA back in as a combat multiplier to commanders in the field and on the ground.
Okay. I want to go back to Lonnie before we go any further, simply because I think to me, and maybe to many others, the most well-known component of the ASA, or the most well-known story from the Army Security Agency, is the story of this man, James T. Davis, who was the first American killed in the Vietnam War. He was killed in action on December 22nd, 1961. He's the first name on the wall, I believe, and he was a member of the Army Security Agency. That's how I first became familiar with the ASA, running across his name. Lonnie, can you tell us a little bit about Tom Davis?
Well, Tom was a young man from Tennessee. He had, I think, 3 years of college. He was what we called a Duffy, direction finder. There was a problem when we first went to Vietnam with the PRC-1 because of the topography in Vietnam.
What's the ERC-1?
It's a direction finding equipment.
Okay.
And so they decided to try to solve the problem by mounting it in trucks and getting closer to the enemy. And he was ambushed. IED blew up, turned the truck over. He managed to get out, pull one of the drivers out, got in a firefight, and was killed.
Oh, so he actually was trying to get that equipment closer to the enemy, which
Correct.
put him in a vulnerable position.
Correct.
Boy, that's an interesting story. Thank you very much. And he's quite well remembered in the Army Security Agency history. Here's a bust of him and a plaque. Lonnie, where is this from?
This is a funny story. My wife and I were visiting Nashville. We were out on the street, walking down the street, and there was a record store, Ernest Tubbs Record Store. And we walked in and we're walking down through the aisles, and all of a sudden I see this ASA patch on this bust. And it turns out that the owner of the Ernest Tubb record store in Nashville is from the same hometown. And he had commissioned this bust of Tom.
Hmm. And so the Army intelligence commemorated him by naming the station. This was at Tonsanut in
That's
Saigon?
correct. We were at the end of the flight line, basically, at the time, and this was the entrance to Davis Station, 3rd Radio Research Unit. The library at Fort Devens was also named after Tom.
Okay. Radio Research Unit. That sounds like trying to cover some
Gobbledygook.
bugbear. Yeah, gobbledygook. Okay, thanks. I didn't want to put it that way, but
It was intended to be vague.
it was intended to be vague so that nobody would really know what you were doing. Got it. And of course, and this goes without saying, you couldn't talk to other people about what you were doing, right? I would imagine.
It was ingrained in us right from the beginning. Top secret cryptographic clearance. You don't talk to people about what you do. In fact, in Okinawa, there was a sign that said, I think it said something like, what you do here, what you hear here, what you know here doesn't ever leave here.
Okay.
And that was at the operations door leaving out of, I misquoted it, but that's close to what it said.
So I'm assuming, Lonnie, that you kind of never told your parents or your friends, or even after the war, after you came home from Vietnam, you just didn't really talk about specifically.
When I got out in 65, at the end of 65, it was before all the anti-war stuff started and so forth. So a soldier coming home was nothing particularly of interest. But then I returned to college, and you didn't dare talk about what you did or where you'd been or anything. I spent 30 months overseas, 15 in Taiwan, 15 in Vietnam.
Boy, that's a long time, 2.5 years. So did you get nervous at all when you were writing this book that you might be revealing things that shouldn't be revealed?
Can I take the fifth?
So did you publish first and ask permission, or did you ask permission first?
I published, period.
Okay, you just published.
And Bill was talking about how difficult it was to get information. I have one of my FOIA requests, which was stacks of reports that are unfortunately over here on the floor of my office, but took 5 years to get them out of NSA. 5 years for one FOIA request.
5 years for one request, so that the Army was still holding on to a lot of this stuff tightly. Bill mentioned his recruiter when he joined the Army and how he got into the ASA. John Peart just told me a story that John, I'm going to ask you to unmute. John, you were a member of the Army Security Agency, and I wondered if you wouldn't mind sharing that story about what the recruiter told you about the Army Security Agency.
I took my physical and testing in late November, and I got my draft notice in last January and reported February 8th to St. Louis Induction Center to go to Fort Leonard Wood. And a recruiter pulled me out of line and put me in a little office, and he sat me down and he said, "Son, you showed some abilities to take Morse code. And because of those abilities, if you joined the Army Security Agency, you wouldn't have to go to Vietnam." And he told me about these nice duty stations, Hawaii, Fort Devens, Texas, Panama, Europe, everywhere except Vietnam. And then I said, "Well, why is that?" And he told me that I would have to enlist in the Army Security Agency, and I had about 5 minutes to think about it. Otherwise, I was going to be at Fort Leonard Wood that night, taking basic training. So he gave me 5 minutes. He walked out, and I thought about it, and I thought, I drafted 2 years Vietnam, ASA 3 years, nice duty stations, didn't have to go anywhere, didn't have to go to Vietnam. So when he walked back in 5 minutes, I said, I'll go. And he said, son, one thing I forgot to tell you, that's a 4-year enlistment. So I'd already made up my mind to to enlist, and I thought at that point, one more year
Okay.
isn't that important.
So John, we have a recruiter here who used some classic sales techniques. The high pressure sales pitch, you have 5 minutes to make up your mind. The bait and switch, offering you one thing, giving you another. And then there's the blatant dissimulation that you didn't have to go to Vietnam. I'm looking at your hat. I see the Vietnam ribbon on it. You went to Vietnam, right?
Spent 2 years there, 24 months.
24. Did you ever write a formal letter of complaint saying that you were?
No, heard plenty of stories.
So that was not unusual. Oh, this is so interesting. Vern Grunke, is that how you pronounce your last name?
Grinke.
Grinke.
Grin is in Greenwich, key is in key.
Grinke. Okay. Thank you very much for joining us. You're also somebody who's very involved in preserving the history of the Army Security Agency and making sure that the ASA veterans kind of have a place to gather. You have a wonderful website, ASA Lives.
Yes.
Tell us how you got into the Army and how you got into the ASA.
Kind of like John, I went. Me and two buddies went to the draft board and said we were going to volunteer for 2 years because we knew we were going to get drafted within 6 months. And she says, well, "Why don't you go see an Army recruiter and get some good out of it as long as you're going to do it?" So we said, "Okay, well, that's 3 years." And I was 2 hours from going to Fort Leonard Wood as John when the guy come out of the room and said, "Hey guys, me and my buddy, we scored really high and I got a deal for you." And he gave us the pitch, and he had a little trifold pamphlet and it says non-combatant agency. And I thought, well, that sounds good to me. And then it had the MOSs in there like Morse code intercept or Morse intercept operator. Well, that sounds kind of interesting. It didn't say you had to type it 8 hours a day, it just said intercept it. So we fell for it. And next thing you know, I was in for 4 years.
So tell me what a Morse code or a Morse intercept operator does.
A Morse code interceptor sits at a typewriter or a mill, they called it, and pounds on the keys really hard because you're typing on 8-ply carbon paper. And every knit and die you 8 plies.
And I'm sorry, Vern, I have to interrupt you because we have a young man with us here in the Zoom room. We have other young people, but one in particular is my very favorite, Henry Shepke. He lives in Madison, Wisconsin. He's now a high school senior, I believe. And so, you know, this kid is 18 years old. He may not know what a carbon copy is, but these are eight sheets of paper, and you press hard on them and they make an imprint on the one all the way down to the 8th piece of paper.
You know, stand full of paper that went through as it went off, you know, it came out of a box and it went into another box. And all you did is basically transcribe what you heard in your ear into a keystroke. Did I, A, boom, T, boom, boom, like that. And that's all you did for 8 hours a day.
And Vern, where did you do that?
Well, I didn't do that because I flunked out of a 05H school.
So you flunked out.
You had to pass 18 words a minute to graduate. And I got up to about 12 and I hit the wall. Actually, I was AOG or ahead of the game for the first 2 weeks. So they advanced me 2 classes because I was so good. And a few weeks later, I wasn't so good. And so then they took a bunch of us that couldn't pass and they put us into 05D, which is direction finding. And all you had to do was be able to recognize the code and know you had the right signal. You didn't really have to copy it.
Yes.
So that was my luckiest day in the Army is to get diverted into 05D school.
So tell me how direction finding worked.
Well, they showed us in the school. The signal comes towards an antenna, and you have a loop antenna, and so you can get a high part of the signal and you get a low part of the signal or a null. And there's if you work on the null rather than the high part, that's a more of a differentiation between nothing and a little bit of signal as opposed to the broader side. And so you're listening for that null. Now at the time they had already developed equipment that had 4 antennas and sometimes even 15 antennas, which would electronically spin the antenna around to get the direction of the antenna, and they would display it on a green scope with just a propeller pattern. And the propeller pattern would direct her to the degree of where the signal was coming from. And then you would line it up, and then you send your report in. And they also had what James T. Davis worked on, the PRD-1, Portable Radio Direction Finder. It was a 2-man luggable device, they called it. And they said, but you'll never see it in Vietnam because they never use it. And so when I went to Vietnam, that's what I did. That's
what you did.
Yeah, after we were there for a little while, guys were coming over from Massachusetts and Fort Evans who hadn't been trained on it. So we had OJ training them on the job because they thought they were going to come over to look at this little scope and find out, no, you put these headsets on, you got to listen for the spot you're looking for.
Now, in retrospect, would you say that you had good duty?
Oh, definitely, compared to sitting there at a typewriter for 8 hours a day.
Right.
Except
Right.
in Vietnam, it wasn't so great because we sat out in the boonies with the military advisors, just maybe 6 or 8 people out there, and we would sit in our Jeep with our Jeep-mounted radio direction finder in the sun, no shade, and in direct. We built a sandbag wall around us a little bit to kind of protect us from snipers, but otherwise we were pretty open to any kind of open fire there if someone so chose.
And thank you, Vern, for bringing that up. Yeah, I'm going to go to Lonnie in a second here, but so you were officially classified as a non-combatant,
Right.
but it's just from reading your book, Lonnie, I get the sense that a lot of you were in harm's way a lot of the time.
We were young and dumb. So, but one of the things that came out of Tom Davis's demise, unfortunate death, was that the military decided we needed a better form of direction finding, and therefore we started experimenting and came up with airborne radio direction finding.
Got it.
And I'll tell Vern something he probably doesn't know. The original manual for airborne radio direction finding in the Beaver, the de Havilland Beaver, called for 05Ds, Duffy's.
Yeah.
But you couldn't copy enough code, so they moved it over to 05Hs, and 05Ds got booted from the planes.
Okay. There's been a long war about ARDF versus SRDF, short range direction finding.
You guys are going to start using jargon that I don't understand, but I'm going to, Lonnie, I was interested. You sent me a lot of photographs, wonderful photographs from your book. And by the way, I do want to say I highly recommend this book. I mean, I didn't read the whole thing. It's a nice big book, but man, is it well written. And I told Lonnie, I said, Lonnie, you're such a good writer. And he said, no, I'm not. Gary B. Blackburn did all the writing. I did the research. So Gary, please do send my regards to Gary for putting this history into a very engaging form. It's a really good read. But anyhow, you sent me a lot of photos from the book. And I was intrigued, Lonnie, that so many of the photos were of aircraft. Why is that?
That's because the airborne radio direction finding became such an important part of ASA in Vietnam. This is the de Havilland Beaver, old aircraft 682. Some of these things are still flying in Canada on floats now. The young man standing here is Ken Kennedy. He and I flew a lot together. But you can see the dipole antennas out on the end of the wing to the left.
Here, oh, here, yes. That's right.
Yes, exactly.
And so you flew in this plane.
Yeah, we'd have pilot. Occasionally we'd have co-pilot. More times than not, we were short pilots. The radio operator would be in the back, the intercept operator. We'd go up, fly an area, and when you picked up a signal, you started copying on your flap by hand as much as you could copy so that it could be identified later. The plane would go into flat turns. You'd get a null in the signal, a quiet area. You'd roll up the plane on its side, mark where you were over the jungle. Then you'd dive. You'd mark 3, you get a triangulation on the signal, and the transmitter was somewhere within 75 meters of that area.
So I ask a lot of stupid questions, Lonnie. I'm not a veteran. But it strikes me you're flying low and slow, so you're probably a nice big fat target for the enemy. Is that true?
We started off high enough, but by the time we finished and got 3 cuts on the signal, what we call cuts on the signal, 3 nulls, you were sometimes down to 200 or 300 feet.
Oh, geez. Okay, well, that makes you a nice target. How about this plane?
That's a U-8. That is actually the airframe is a Beechcraft Seminole, and that was the second airplane we got in Vietnam. They had Doppler radar underneath, so you didn't have to roll it up on its side to mark where you are in the jungle. However, more times than not, the Doppler radio was fried underneath the airplane on the tarmac because it was so hot.
Oh.
So you ended up flipping the airplane up even further because this is above the wing aircraft.
Okay.
This is a Caribou. We only had 1 Caribou. This is a little result of flying over an area where they didn't want you to fly.
Right, right.
And this is the P-2 Neptune.
Okay.
This was being flown by a guy's Army. It was taken from the Navy, 6 aircraft. It used to fly mostly Laos, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, etc. Long operations, hold a bunch of operators, linguists, as well as manual Morse intercept operators. This was called left bank. You see the antenna sticking out of the front of the Huey.
Oh, gosh, yes.
It was affectionately known as the elephant brander.
And there's actually also words here on the nose of the helicopter called the ugly.
Yeah, there were 3 of them, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Oh,
We lost 2 of those.
Did you?
In Vietnam with the crews.
Boy, is this interesting.
Oh.
Let me go. I want to make sure. Well, Paul Jessic dropped off a little bit there. Brian Harrison, are you an ASA veteran?
I am not. I'm a Vietnam veteran, but I was an infantry guy and a door gunner. But I have interest in that I collect enemy radios of Vietnam, and I have a couple behind me. And these are the radios that the ASA were listening to. One of the radios I have was brought home by an Army chaplain who was also a ham radio operator, but I don't think he ever got it working. And the other one I actually got from a ham in China. So that's that angle.
That is so interesting. What got you into collecting enemy radios?
Well, I was there. I didn't know anything about the ASA, by the way. I did see some of the Brown later aircraft at Da Nang, but I don't think they were ASA. I think they were set up for infrared stuff, but I'm not sure. It was always, I was only a Spec 4, so nobody told me anything.
Yeah,
so,
right.
Anyway, let me show you just real quick.
Oh my gosh.
I've got some radios around.
Look at those.
But here's a couple of radios that these are the ones. The Chinese gave about 30,000 radios to the North Vietnamese, and this one is called an XD6 or a 102E, and it's a kind of a gray color. And then this one's a 71A, and I have seen one of these with a plaque. There was a gentleman named Colonel Hoffman that ran the ASA in Vietnam for most of 1967. After I did a presentation to a antique radio group about the enemy radios, his son contacted me and showed me he had a 71A, but he had a nice plaque on it that said, presented to Colonel Hoffman, head of U.S. ASA Pacific. and it was like dated 1967, and the group that might have been the Tansanuk group. I'm not sure, but anyway, it was a tremendous, a great artifact. So these were the radios they were listening to.
Brian, how did you hear about this program tonight? Because I don't recall you being on our Zoom before.
Lonnie mentioned it to me. I know Lonnie. I know Vern. Hey, Vern.
Okay.
And I know Duncan. Duncan's another ASA guy from the Antique Wireless group that I a part of. So,
what a wonderful happenstance that you joined us tonight. That is so interesting. I'm going to ask
John,
Brian. Yeah.
this is Lonnie. To be interested, what he was just talking about, in interest of that, on 20 December 1969, the Big Red One captured a North Vietnamese intercept group with all their equipment. There was a unit commander, a Vietnamese voice intercept operator, an English voice intercept operator, manual Morse intercept operator, 2 manual Morse analysts, and a female nurse.
wow.
And they captured ANPRC 25s and 77s. They were listening to everything we were doing. They had training manuals. They had knowledge of our operating procedures, artillery target information, ambush site information, casualty reports, B-52 strike warnings. The code for B-52 strike warnings were artillery fire to 60,000 feet. That's hardly maintaining security. So they were doing the same thing we were doing.
Absolutely.
I'm going to ask Brian and anybody else who has not joined us before, if you could, Brian, I would love to invite you on to talk further about these radios. This is a fascinating thing to me. So please do. I want to be able to get hold of you. If you would leave your email, you could privately chat me, however you want to do it. But I hope you do send me your contact information so I could
I'd be glad to.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Brian. I'm going to go to William Mears.
Yes.
You served both in Vietnam and then also in Siberia?
No, on Shatosi was the 12th field station of the ASA, and that is located right off of Siberia.
Okay.
Mhm.
So you listened to both the Russians and the North Vietnamese?
At separate times, yes.
At separate times?
Yes.
Did that require you to know the language?
No, it didn't. My responsibilities at that field station were the Russian Naval Infantry, sometimes known as the Russian Naval Marines, and so they had bases right across from Vladivostok, which was closest to us. Then that's the furthest east you can go in the USSR, and right all the way across to almost the Ural Mountains. And they had bases there, which was my duty to intercept all of their communications and obviously forward it to the NSA.
Now you did, so was it electronic? Was it Morse code?
It was Morse code, yes.
Morse
I
code.
was an 05H. Earlier in its life, as far as history goes, they had the numbers, the 058.
Yes.
And it switched to 05H.
H. Okay.
Yeah. So that was my first duty station after Fort Devens. And so that's, did I need to know Russian? No, we had linguists. Primarily it was code. Obviously the Russians were quite sophisticated. But in most cases, we could break their codes at that time. And so we really knew what was going on. That was my responsibilities. Obviously, other members who were also 05Hs had their specific targets. And so the one that I mentioned in a brief email to you was the Czechoslovakian connection, and which one of my cohorts was responsible for. And but mine was along the border, and that's where the toilet paper war came about.
Can you tell us about the toilet paper war?
Well, towards the end of 66, I was in breaking the codes along with our analysts and everything. We saw, let me go back a little bit. It's a little bit long story, but stop me if you want to. The Trans-Siberian Railway is, for the most part, a single track that runs from basically western Russia, about the Ural Mountains, all the way to Vladivostok. And so everything, and in many of the areas, it's only about 10 miles from the Mongolian or Chinese border. But everything that's going by land from Western Russia to Eastern Russia was on the Trans-Siberian. So all of my Russian naval Marines were running the posts along the Trans-Siberian Railway, and we started breaking their codes, and primarily they had boxcar after boxcar of toilet paper, boxcar after boxcar of medical supplies, all sorts of things. But the quantities didn't make sense to us in the start because they were ordering supplies that were going to last 1 or 2 years when typically they might have had a month's supply. And we were totally confused for a while. And we started thinking, what would they do that for? And the answer was is the Chinese and the Soviets did not have a good relationship. And Russia claimed some of the land in northern China. And does it sound like the Ukraine at this
Yeah,
stage?
yeah.
They have a long history of that, obviously, if you look back. And so uh, together, basically, I said, you know what? It sounds like they're going to start a war, and because there's only a single track there, they know that if they start losing the war with the Chinese, and the Chinese come, let's say, 10 miles into Russia as a counterattack, they need to have the stuff already there, spread across basically the 2/3 of the USSR from Kazakhstan to Vladivostok. And they have to have it beforehand. So they were pre-planning. So we just on our own, we started calling it the toilet paper war because we just saw tons and tons of toilet paper. And of course, sanitary conditions and medical supplies are paramount to an army that's going to be in combat, and people are going to get killed and wounded and everything. So just myself and the analyst, we just started calling it the toilet paper war, and which got picked up at the NSA that we were calling it the toilet paper war. And lo and behold, after they got their supplies in order, planning their invasion of China across that border there, they invaded. They had about 10,000, around a division of Soviet Marines that were going to invade. We also found that the Chinese were not really responding to anything that was going. So we knew that basically the Chinese were not intercepting the Russian communications. They were going to be surprised,
Hmm.
but we knew about it because there were nuclear combatants in both cases. We knew it was strategic at Chitose. And so one of the things is that I sent my reports under the Five Eyes program. Our number one bosom buddy is the British, and so I sent my reports to MI6 and the predecessor of the General Communications Intercept people for the UK in Hong Kong, which at that time obviously was a British colony. And that's where their Western or Far Eastern, if you want that, headquarters to be. So basically copies of my reports went to them to notify them because in a nuclear war, as we all know, nuclear dust and everything is not kept to one small location. It's going to circulate around the world. It's strategic. The British needed to know. I did not send anything to the Canadians, New Zealand, or Australia at that time, but definitely the UK and us needed to know what was probably going to happen, and which in the end did happen as they invaded. They got about, as far as we can determine, and remember, there weren't a million satellites up in the air pinpointing each soldier down on the earth at that time in history. So we estimate that they probably got about 10 or 20 miles into before the Chinese could react and send enough reinforcements to push them back towards the border and, of course, towards the Trans-Siberian Railway. But in the end, they decided to, after we estimate there was at least 3,000 or 4,000 of their soldiers killed, so it was not insignificant. They called a truce and went back to their, at that time, a geographic border. And so that's where the toilet paper war.
That's the toilet paper war. Thank you,
I
William.
and my analysts came up with.
That's so great.
And it's always gotten whenever have in recent years, obviously I was not allowed to mention it for 20 years under the
Right.
agreement with the ASA. And I probably didn't mention it till after about 30, 35 years, but I only mentioned it to some close relatives, and they, of course, had a good chuckle at the
Right.
name, the toilet paper war. There we go.
Thank you for that, William. And I do want to invite people to ask questions. I know Al Smith put a provocative question here in the chat. Bill Confer had his hand up. Marcia Flage. Oh, that's Bob Flage. Why you change your name to Marcia now, Bob? Let's go to Bill Jessic or Paul Jessic. Paul, you were going to add something or comment.
Well, just a comment. Well, actually, a couple comments. First of all, how did we all get so old?
Yeah.
We were all 19, 20-year-olds at one time. What happened to us? But I'm, as I said earlier on, I'm from Latrobe, Pennsylvania, and a lot of these ASA guys are getting together all across the country for breakfast, lunches, and so forth, like on a monthly basis. If anybody in Western Pennsylvania is interested in that, I'd be happy to organize that.
I think Joe Adams might be interested in that. Joe lives in Western PA.
Okay.
Joe, that's a wonderful thing to suggest. Joe, if you want to unmute, let me ask you, Joe, how did you get in the ASA?
Well, after I dropped out of college a little bit after Kennedy was shot, and everybody was sort of reeling around, I had the draft was going to be coming after me, and so I started thinking about the options, and of course they were trying to sell the infantry, and I am not the kind of guy who would be you wouldn't want me to carry an M60 machine gun. It would take about 3 steps to be on the ground. So my brother, who lived in Chicago and had a lot of fraternity friends and had a lot of experience dodging the draft, which he successfully did, suggested I try to see if I could get an Army intelligence. Well, it turned out that you couldn't do that unless you had a degree, which I didn't. But they said, there's a thing we could offer you that's almost as good. And so I went, let's see, that sergeant was in Toledo. I was in Toledo at the time. And he said, this is such a good deal. You know, almost, the bennies are almost beyond belief. And oh, by the way, it is a 4-year enlistment. This is an old story I've heard before. Yeah. And so I said to myself, the fact of the matter is, there's no war going on in 1964. What the hell? And there wasn't really a whole lot. And I did have a brush of French in college, and That's probably what they would have called it, but the letter was farther down the scale than that. And so I said, well, gee, I kind of know French. Maybe they'll send me to Paris.
The Paris of Southeast Asia, maybe.
Well, they did speak French in Vietnam. And of course, I didn't know anything about that whatsoever. And when I was in high school, they called it Indochina.
Right.
What the hell is that? Not there anymore. Okay. And so I said to myself, and I said to my brother, well, look, this looks like about as good a deal as I can get. And I'm adding up all oh, this is, you get to do this and you get to do that. And there's a lot of things that what happened there that were sort of mysterious. And I will share one story with you. When I came back from Vietnam, plane landed at Travis Air Force Base in, is that the one in California, guys?
Yep.
Yeah. And so then I had a little layover and I had to get back to back home. And there was two guys dressed in Marine outfits, and they were in the plane with me. And they, I don't know if I should tell you that they had us fly first class whenever we had an airplane. It was just very difficult. We usually only had 2 drinks before the plane landed. But anyway, so these guys were Marines, and they sure looked like Marines. And I said, well, you guys are Marines, right? And I'm thinking, if I get into a fight or if somebody decides they want to make me spill the beans, I'm going to call these guys. And this guy looked at me and he said, well, actually, we're not real Marines. And I shut the hell up and I said to myself, well, I've been talking with us, working with stuff I've been unable to talk to anybody about, and I'm sure they don't want to tell me why they're not real Marines, but they're dressed like them. I just said, fine. You guys go ahead. I'm right behind you. Yep. And that's what happened.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for that story. Bob Flage, do you have a question or a comment? And I'm wondering if it's the same one that Al Smith had here in the chat.
No, it's a comment. You've been asking people how they got into the ASA. I've got a very good friend. He's in the Military Order of the Purple Heart, our chapter in Jacksonville. His name's Ernest Cerna. Was a Mexican, is a Mexican, but he's Americanized. He first saw airplanes like when he was picking cotton in Texas. And after graduation from high school, he's working construction. He goes to the Air Force recruiter, says, I want to fly. And they said, you don't have college, sorry. A little bit later, an Army recruiter showed up at his house and he told him what he wanted and whatever. And the guy says, well, I can tell you, it's going to be hard how to do it, but but if you follow what I tell you. Anyway, he says, I've got a job that I can put you in, and if you accept that, you can go to college while you're there, and you can, then eventually fly. And he did. He went to Germany, and he was the ASA sitting on the German border for 4 years. Now this guy's fluent, totally fluent in German, writes, reads, does everything. And he came back. By that time he came back to the States, he had a degree, and he's in the helicopter training room. And some guy walks in and says, who wants to be a fixed wing? And he and 5 other guys raise their hands. And he goes to fixed wing school and ends up becoming his first year, he just chased missiles that they lost when they were shooting practice. And he ends up going to Vietnam, gets shot down in the bird. And anyway, he ends up becoming a pilot with fixed wings, OB-10s, I believe, OB-1 or OB-10. Anyway, Ernest Cerna retired as a CW-5 with 34 air medals. But he got backdoored into,
what an interesting Army.
Because,
that's an unusual Army career and an interesting one.
Absolutely. He ended up flying for 10 years as commercial after, when he retired.
Thank you, Bob. I hope is he still around? Is he still with us?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh,
We're in the military of the Purple Heart, and we have monthly meetings.
I'd love to get him. I'd love to get him on our Zoom program sometime to talk
Yeah,
about it.
I interviewed him for the National Register.
Oh,
That's
nice.
how I
Okay.
knew him, but then I
You
said,
got his
"I'm
whole
coming,"
story.
So that's how I got more of his story and
Right.
before and after and all of that. So
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. I want to go to Bill Confer. Bill, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I just was interested in a couple of things, but for Bob's information, there's an O-1 and an OV-10, the two fixed wing aircraft. The OV-10 is the Mohawk, and it's twin engine. The O-1
right,
is
right. He was
all
he ended up being the command. Anybody that came to Germany, that's where he was flying later. Anybody that came to Germany, he had to fly with them on their fifth an observation flight. And they actually crashed that one because they iced up and the engines quit or whatever. And, but he survived it.
Chris Perullo.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good.
Yes.
Good. Hi, I just wanted to chime in and say hello to my service cousins here. My name's Chris Perullo, CTO1 with the Naval Security Group. Just wanted to mention that there were three like organizations, and that was the Army Security Agency, the Air Force Security Service, and the Naval Security Group. And they have morphed now into network warfare in different names, 16th Air Force and 10th Fleet, etc. But we all share the knowledge of the same systems, the same equipment, same strategies, and something that's not talked about much is a strategic mission, since we all reported to the big house, the Naval Security Agency. I'm sorry, the National Security Agency. So that was a common bond that we had here. But so I just wanted to say hello to you, and I'm really happy to hear more about your mission and your methods and the work you did. Each one of the services has different domains to take care of, and we work together in certain zones and in a common mission. But the Army, of course, had quite a lot of. They were focused on land side, and Russian Army. All the adversarial armies here. Navy will specialize in the seaborne threats in support of everybody, and the Air Force, of course, surveillance and all the things they need to protect their domain and their assets there. So just wanted to say hello. Just a couple comments. I couldn't master the code either, so that was about that. That's that. Yeah, you're getting a couple chuckles because that's quite difficult. And I always admired the guys who could sit at deposit and just drink a cup of coffee and always be behind the signal, but definitely know what they were copying. That was a gift. 8-ply paper. I dealt with 3-ply carbon wrap paper, but National Cash Register came out with the carbonless copy paper in 1975. And that was a blessing to get cartons of that aboard ship. So we didn't have to deal with that nonsense anymore. What a waste. What a miserable thing that was. What else is there? Did anybody work in the AN Flare 9, the big elephant cage?
Oh, yes. I wanted to bring that up. That's a good. Thank you for bringing that up here. This is
common
the
to the Navy.
cage.
Yeah, this is common to the Navy, but I'm not sure about the other services.
I know Renee Johnson saw this. Renee, I'm going to ask Renee to unmute if she has a chance. I've got to find Renee here. Renee saw this in Thailand, I believe. And Renee was not, here you go, Renee. Renee was not part of the ASA, but she was in the USO. She was also at Red Cross Donut Dolly. Renee, this was called the elephant cage, correct?
certainly was.
What is it?
And it's, I think, a Flare 9. And they had them, the Army had them in several parts of the world. I didn't know the Navy did.
Oh, yeah.
On Ramasan Station in Thailand, which was really kind of a good assignment for the ASA people, they had the Navy, the Air Force, and even, I believe, some NSA people on the base when I was there from 74 to 76. And I left right after they snuck all the equipment, of course, leaving the cage there, out of the country because the Thai government wanted to keep it. And they brought trucks in one night and snuck it out and up to Udorn Air Force Base and got it over to the Philippines. But it was a great assignment because the ASA people were the brightest.
Oh,
Well, pretty much. And I shouldn't say that, but they were just really bright. And in Vietnam, when we would try out our programs before we took to the field, a lot of us would go to the radio research units on the basis where we were because they made great critics of
yeah.
our programs. Of course, we didn't know they were ASA and we'd never heard of it, and we were just dumb, but I learned a lot more about it later.
Renee, thank you for bringing that up, that they're smart or they're bright.
They are very bright.
I agree. It's so interesting for me as a student of, I guess, the armed forces and armed forces history to begin to understand the culture of each branch of service and then each sub branch of service. And I've been really struck as I've been preparing this program tonight that the veterans who contact me from the Army Security Agency, how do I say this? Their emails are well written. They are insightful. You could hear just the discourse tonight, the way, how they talk about their service. They're very connected with their units. So there seems to be, and I love Joe Adams saying, yeah, if they gave him an M60, it would it'd fall over in 2 steps. Yeah, you belong in the ASA, Joe. That it's almost as if, I think today it's kind of like the Space Force occupies that cerebral space in our armed forces. But I'm getting the sense here that there's a culture in the ASA. Lonnie said it before, you're kind of in the Army, but not of it, a stovepipe unit. Chris Perolo, you have said that to me in the Navy. You're on the ship, but you're not a member of the crew necessarily. You're kind of separate from them. There's that separate, that segregated sense to the ASA that I find really interesting.
It's funny. They call us a detachment, and we're detached from crew, but we are crew
Yeah.
when we're on the thing there. I'd be remiss if I did not tell you that Marines and Naval Security come under the umbrella of the Naval Security Group too.
Okay.
So they go to the same training center. We learn all the same things, only then they specialize in taking that to the field, as well as their own communication centers on, like Marine Air Base or something like that. So Marines and Navy work under the Naval Security Group. They're not left out.
Bill Luker has been sitting patiently listening to this banter. Would you agree that, Bill, that Army Security Agency veterans are the smartest veterans in the world?
Well, that's what we were always told. The top 10% is the way they worded it. I have to interject here that I'm the chairman of the National Army Security Agency Association, and I want to thank you for taking the time to honor us on our birthday. Vern Grunke is Grinke. That guy is a member of our board of directors. Bill was a former member of our board until real world operations took all his time. Beyond that, I have to be quiet unless Bill tells me it's okay to say something.
I want to. I'm sorry.
Lonnie.
Yeah, Lonnie.
I will agree with Chris totally. I had the privilege when I first arrived in Taiwan for my first duty overseas to work for the Air Force Security Service for 4 months. I set up a position for them. They were short of intercept operators. And it was a real treat to do that. And then when I got to Fubai, we had a group of Marines there in 63 called the First Radio Composite. And they did a hell of a job. We thought they were crazy. They wanted to go outside the wire all the time and fight, but
They're Marines. I mean, what the heck? That's what they do. Jerry Freed, you're another person. And I know that we have other ASA veterans here, and I'm looking at the clock and I'm hoping that we get to say at least hello to all of you. Jerry,
Yeah,
tell me
I was in Thailand in 73, 74, and I was a teletype repair guy, and I got recruited out of Fort Gordon. I was working teletype repair, and all of a sudden this guy says, come with me, we're going to go talk. And next thing I know, I'm an ASA.
teletype repair.
Yeah, I worked teletype repair and then also cryptographic. And what we would do, I was at that elephant cage that you showed a picture of.
Oh, were you?
Yeah. And matter of fact, that's gone now. That's been
Well,
all bulldozed.
Part of it, the base is gone, but there's part of the thing still left, just not the
Right.
big tower.
They got a museum in, I guess, in the middle of it from Thailand. There's a friend of mine that wrote a couple of books about that. And then we were in the signal site, Mekong signal site, just north of there. And I was up in the river. And it was one of those things that I got a kick. I've been married 48 years now. And I was sitting on a couch reading a magazine. And all of a sudden in the Air and Space magazine, they start talking about some of the stuff that, they told us don't talk about. And my wife was telling me, get over it. I was a virgin once, not now.
And I must say, I want to tell people that Teletype was one of the most complicated machines in the world. They no longer exist. Gator, were you also? And Gator, I'm glad that you did put your name here and address and contact information. Gator, that's your nom de guerre. But what did you do in the ASA?
77, I went in the ASA and I served at Bid Hill Farm Station, Warrington, Virginia. And that elephant cage he was talking about, we had one in Bid Hill as well. I was in the outs unit, the outstation tactical, served 7 tractor trailer rigs with 3 huts on each one of them, all combined together. And I ran the communications center there. And trust me, Jerry, thank you for fixing our teletypes because they stunk.
Teletypes are long gone. They're a thing of history now.
I tell you, I could do 125 words a minute on that teletype, though. I was cranking it.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
I want to show a picture of a 1970s vintage teletype. I'll look one up. Tom Richardson, your ASA.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I was on Okinawa. I was a radio direction finding operator, a Duffy, 05D. And at that time frame, we had to be trained as Morse code intercept operators. We had 2 MOSs. We had to train as 05Hs for Morse code intercept, and then further our education in the radio direction finding world. So I was sent to Okinawa and served 2 years there. It only required a 3-year enlistment, which was kind of surprising to me. We spent, basically, if you count basic training and AIT, we were in school for a year, and then, only had a 2-year obligation after that. So that was my history with ASA.
Let me ask you this, if you don't mind. Did your time in the Army, there's 3 years you did, and the education that you got, did it help you in the civilian world?
Not directly, but it certainly was a maturing process. Yeah. And then later in my working career, I did go to work for NSA as a contractor. So just having that background, that training in this world was very beneficial. And somebody mentioned, I know the ASA officially went away on January 1st, 1977. Right. That was the time frame. That was about halfway through my enlistment. And really all we did was change our patches on our uniforms. We kept doing the same job. In fact, I had one of my dress screens. I didn't even change my patch on it. I kept the old ASA patch on it. I never wore it, but it was hanging in my wall locker. But our job didn't change, and our world didn't change. We still had a pretty lax environment. It was totally separate from the Army. Now, I'm sure that changed, that morphed over time once NSCOM came, our organization. But It was still a pretty lax group. Once we got out of basic training, we didn't have to do PT. I remember only doing one PT test, and that was because we got a CO on Okinawa that was a really gung-ho guy, and he did one PT test, and I think so many people failed it, he never did it again. And he had the bright idea of sending us to the rifle range to requalify with M16s, and that was a disaster as well. We didn't have our own rifle range. We had to borrow one of the Marine Corps rifle ranges, and apparently we tore up the range so bad that they told us never come back again. I mean, we hit everything but the targets. Somebody even shot the water tower of all things, and so that was the end of our range training for M16. So it was a very special world, a very different world that morphed into NSCOM, and of course NSCOM still exists. I imagine this is all automated now. They don't have nearly the manual content. It's probably all done by computers, but I'd like to think somebody's still out there listening and taking radio direction finding shots and things like that.
Yeah, how interesting. Skip Sarman, how are you? What did you do in the ASA?
I'm another 05D Duffy.
You were Duffy.
Yeah.
Where?
I was stationed in Vietnam, and as was already mentioned, we had PRD teams that went out on trucks and jeeps and stuff.
Yeah.
We also had ARDF, which was the planes. But for radio direction finding, relies on a thing called triangulation. So you can't just take one shot and locate a target. You have to take multiple shots from multiple locations. And we had detachments all over Vietnam. I think we had 14 of them specifically. When they found out I knew something about vehicles, they put me on convoy to go out to all those detachments and set them up, train them, supply them, that kind of stuff. So I got to see a lot of Vietnam that way.
So you got around.
I got around. Mostly in central Vietnam, QL-19 and QL-1, out to Pleiku, quite a few trips. It was an interesting experience because, like I think Vern said, or somebody, that got me out from behind the desk.
Can you get, maybe Lonnie or Bill can give me a sense of how many Army Security Agency personnel were in Vietnam at any one time?
At the height of the war, there were approximately 6,000 ASA.
Oh, wow. Oh, geez.
Vietnam, we lost 65 people.
Jeez,
the whole war.
That's more than I would have guessed. Tony Talek.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your patience here. You live north of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, almost in Erie.
Okay, and you've been to our events before, our in-person events. Tell me, how did you get into the ASA?
I enlisted. I was interested in making the military a career. I grew up in Pittsburgh, and my dad and all my uncles had been in the service. So, when I got out of high school, that's kind of what you aspire to do. You went to work in the mill, or you went in the military. So I signed up, and I went to language school, spent a year learning to speak Vietnamese. Then I went to one of the Air Force security schools, learned a translator course. And then when I went to Vietnam, I was with the 328th Radio Research in Chu Lai. And the jobs the voice intercept operators did was direct support for the infantry battalions. So there were 3 brigades in the division, and each brigade had 3, 4, maybe 5 battalions. And as they advanced into enemy territory, they needed to have fire support bases so that artillery was readily available when they got in a battle. And the range of the howitzers was maybe 7 miles. So you had a whole bunch of these fire support bases all over the area of operation. And we were in I Corps, kind of on the border with the Marines. And it was called Tuk Valley. And I would go to the different fire support bases, listen on the radio to pick up the Vietnamese voice transmissions. When we captured NVA troops, I got to interrogate them. If we captured any documents, I got to translate those. And we just kind of moved around from fire support base to fire support base. When I got there, there was only 3 of us. And, you almost needed 2 guys to go out, 2 guys to go out together because, someone had to be awake while you were sleeping.
Right.
And then later on, we got more interpreters, and I think we ended up having like 6 guys, and it wasn't such a big burden then. But you'd go out as long as you could stand it, and then you'd come back every couple of weeks to get a shower or something. And
Tony, it sounds like fascinating service to me. I mean, not easy, certainly, not at all, but fascinating. I mean, do you still understand Vietnamese?
Not after 65 years. But you're right, it was fascinating because you really, once you got oriented, once you got OJT from one of the other linies, and once you did that, you were kind of on your own. So you would decide where you wanted to go. You'd go out, usually on a fire support base, there's maybe 3 artillery pieces, a section of mortars, and a company of infantry. And then the other 3 companies would like patrol around that base. And, you had to make your own way. So you get there, you had to introduce yourself to the battalion command people, tell them, why you were there, what you were doing.
Who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah. And, you'd stay there till you decided whether or not it was going to be a productive area. And if not, then you'd move somewhere else. Because we got evaluated by how many intercept minutes you had, how many enemy transmissions you in.
Yeah.
But it was kind of cool because you were like
on your own,
like the invisible man,
Yeah.
You could hear these guys talking. And after a while, you got to recognize their voices and you knew where they were from. I mean, you could hear them just talking about stuff like the American guys would talk about. It was so funny, too, because when we got new guys in the infantry as replacements, they didn't say, hey, you were getting a new guy. They would say, you're getting a new pack. You're getting 6 packs tomorrow because the grunts were these packs. So when you got 6 packs, that meant you had six replacements. And the Vietnamese had the same thing. Only they said you were getting uniforms.
6 uniforms.
Yeah, you're going to get 4 uniforms.
So are you saying, Tony, that when you would listen in on the North Vietnamese, you would hear them talking about everyday things, not just war-oriented?
Yeah. I mean, all their messages were, their real messages were in code, but they knew each other. It's like, hey, boy, I'm hungry. I wish we had some. So, yeah, we're going to the Ville tonight. We're going to get rice and, that kind of stuff. Just like,
boy, how
it's like you would talk to somebody else,
Yeah.
I often thought about just breaking in and saying something, but I never.
Tempting, I'm sure. Hey, before we end the program, I have to get Phil Rutherford to say something. I don't care what he says. Phil, start talking, please.
Hi, Todd. Look, thanks for the invite to this little group. It's great to have a breakfast club meeting at around breakfast time for us. So no, it's great.
So, Phil, I noticed by your accent, you're not from around here. Where are you?
I'm in Canberra, Australia. It's breakfast time here at the moment. So yeah. Now we didn't realize that we were part of the ASA until a few years ago when there was an inquiry to find out why we didn't get the same MUCs and unit citations that other ASA units got. And then that was the first time that any information about us was declassified. So I've been doing a lot of research, and I'm actually writing a massive history about the whole Australian and American SIGINT presence in Vietnam, and learning that we were actually under direct operational control of the 509th Radio Research Group in Saigon, and working to 303rd Radio Research Battalion in Long Binh and Bien Hoa. But at the time, as a 19-year-old, that was the first time overseas. I hadn't really thought that there was anything different. We had a lot of Americans come to visit us, and we had guys go off and spend time with the Americans. We had the occasional general come through. We had General Custer come through there one day with his pearl-handled 6 guns, telling us what a wonderful job we're doing. He said to us, "You fix them, we'll kill them." And we figured that's nice one. So he wanted off. But we'd actually been intercepting Vietnamese communications for years before we went to Vietnam. We had stations set up in Australia and Singapore and Hong Kong. So we had a great deal of experience before we got to Vietnam. And so really it was just another day in the office for us, except we got to carry a weapon. Like most guys, I carried an M16, but I didn't know which end the bullets came out of until someone showed me. And I did get to fire it in anger, but I was really only angry at a water drum, which I filled full of a lot of holes. But it was a massively interesting time, and I really wished I'd taken more notice of what was going on at the time. Our job was we weren't classified by the MOS. We couldn't call ourselves an 05H or 05D because we did everything. We went up in planes. We were out in tracks. We were on foot.
Yeah,
we did analysis while we were sitting there taking down. I had one guy who used to stand there looking at my shoulder, decoding messages. He was so good. So we had massive lot of experience, which is why we often got deployed up into Bien Hoa and other areas.
Right.
Not really realizing we were fighting a bigger war. We thought it's another day at the office.
Phil, I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind contacting me, maybe either putting your contact information, if you haven't already, here in the Zoom chat, or sending me an email or something, because one of my goals for 2026 is to do a program like this with Australian Vietnam veterans. I think it would be so interesting to hear your stories, your perspective, and have our American vets interact with you. So I'd love to get in touch with you about that.
Sure, happy. I'll send you a private message.
All right. Thank you very much, Phil. Nancy Smoyer, how are you? Oh, I'm going to ask you to unmute here.
Hi, I'm good. I'm sorry I'm late. I had a class and I just got here. And I guess Renee has already said something about the Donut Dollies visiting as we called it, the R&R, or Radio Research Unit. So the R&R group at Cu Chi became friends of mine, and I used to go over there and hang out with them in 67, 68, if anybody is on here that was there. And as Renee, I guess, told you, we did practice runs there with our games because they were so smart. They would tell us if it was wrong or if we got the answers wrong or whatever.
That
but
is so
they were a great group. I have some wonderful pictures of them. Yeah.
That's so interesting to me. Thank you, Nancy, for joining us. What class are you taking?
It's we're seeing a movie about Das Boot and talking about subs in World War II, how it's related to that.
Oh, how interesting. Chris Perolo. Yeah.
I'll cut to the chase. How many of you in the last 30 years have found a book and read a book or an article and looked at that and said, my God, I signed a paper that would put me in jail for 10 years if I said that word or described that piece of machinery?
Yeah. Yeah. And here it is in a book.
Yeah.
I remember Bill Luker. Yeah, these guys are all raising their hand. Chris Perolo, you knew the great Julia Parsons, who died at 104 years old, a Navy wave codebreaker. She said she couldn't believe it when she saw in the late 90s in a museum the Enigma machine. This thing was top secret. How could they have it on display? And she went right to the museum staff and said, you have to put that thing away.
And
they said, no, it's declassified now.
I never got a chance to tell her this, but I think all of us were using something similar to that machine as a last resort, all the way up till the 70s, at least. It was a code machine of last resort, still in use that late in the game. Still in
use. I had no idea.
Yeah, very, very cumbersome though, but that's why I say last resort. But Julia made another point that was just made here. Remember, she used to say she could read the personal messages of the crewmen of the submarines.
Yes.
And here we have reading of the personal messages of the Vietnamese. and knowing that you held the fate of their location, that you knew their fate was in your hands, possibly.
Isn't that interesting?
So, interesting parallel.
It's an interesting parallel, and it also does this for Julia. And if we had more time, I would have really pursued this a little bit with Tony. It kind of humanizes the enemy in a sense that you kind of, in a sense, Julia would say, we got to know these German sailors aboard these U-boats as fathers and husbands and, ordinary people who are our age, and we're able to kind of relate to them. And I wonder if the same thing happened, with if you people listening to the Vietnamese. Gary McCone.
Yeah, I guess I was just agreeing that a lot of these situations where there have been security breaches, or what I would call a security breach in the last, whatever, 20 or 30 years, I think those are the ones that really get me. All of us here, we were trained, you don't do that.
Yeah.
And if you did something like that, you know where Leavenworth is?
Yeah.
We would have been locked up for sure. I guess I'll check into the second linguist. I was a Mandarin linguist. I got 2.5 years on Taiwan, so I followed Lonnie and some others. And then after that finished up in 68, well, 68, I went to Taiwan. 70, I left. I went back to Defense Language Institute for North Vietnamese. And then, surprise, surprise, ended up in Vietnam, where, of course, all of us unanimously were told we were not there.
Yes, that's right.
We were there, it turns out. It was a little sleight of hand thing. But I think what surprised me most about, I was at the 175th in Bien Hoa, and I think what surprised me the most, they were still sort of fighting a war. They had Easter Offensive the year that I was there. We didn't have guns or rifles, your choice. They had an armory. I think there are enough weapons, M16s, for everybody, but they didn't trust us with them. And I suppose that was because we were ASA after all. The only time, if we were ever attacked, if we were on alert, then everybody had to, first of all, run to the armory, check out an M16 and a magazine, and then go wherever you're supposed to.
Right.
But that, I think that people who've been in Vietnam and actually are more, what I would consider more boots on the ground, I don't think they consider we were there at all, and probably resent that we have these two little ribbons that we can wear that say, well, of course we were there.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things. But I want to give a plug. I assume that everybody on this call today has read Lonnie and Gary's book, because you should. But I was in for 6.5 years, and it wasn't until I read their book that I found out what ASA actually did.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was just in a little corner.
Yeah, you do your own right.
No need to know.
You need to, exactly.
I was in, I didn't need to know what everybody else was doing.
Absolutely, Gary. That I'll say it again. I'm not a veteran, and when I started working with veterans, I was surprised that Vietnam veterans who were in the Mekong Delta didn't necessarily know much about what happened in I Corps, or those who were in the Air Force didn't know what the Mobile River Marine Force did. That when you're in the military, you're focused on your job. And it's only later that you have the luxury of kind of understanding the broader context and history. So I highly would recommend that people read Lonnie's book, Unlikely Warriors, the Army Security Agency's Secret War in Vietnam, 1961 to 1973. It's a wonderful read and a fascinating one. And I would like to follow up on this conversation, because I'm looking at names. I'm guessing Ernest Gibson, Ed Sterling, Rob Gonzalez, David Forbes might be an ASA veteran, Norm B., somebody who's going by the name of Angela, but I think his name is Larry Hertzberg. I think he's ASA.
Yes, he is.
So, Duncan, we haven't heard from you. So I'm going to very much look forward to scheduling a part 2. Tom Herstein, Dick Snyder, you haven't said anything. I'd like to schedule a part 2 and continue this conversation, or broaden the conversation at another time. We're going to give Bob Flage the last word here. Bob?
Yes, I just have one question. since the program shut down in 77, have any of these agencies dealt with what's happened in Cuba and in Russia as far as these people hearing stuff and messing with their minds?
Do you mean the Havana syndrome? That thing that the Havana syndrome that was reported in
Yes,
embassies?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they can do that for next time, I guess, or whatever.
I have some thoughts on that. Okay. We could pursue that for sure. But I want to thank all of you. This is such an interesting conversation. You're such an interesting group of people. I really appreciate you devoting so much time to the Veterans Breakfast Club in this conversation, to educating us about your service. And I hope you did enjoy it. And I also hope that you'll stay in touch. I would like to, we do open conversations at least once a month. And this open conversations might also be a chance for you to share some more of your service experience until we get to our next dedicated program on the Army Security Agency. So thank you all for joining me. I'm going to be able to save this chat. I'll be contacting all of you and making sure that you get our schedule updates. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Lonnie, for bringing us together. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Bill. Gary.
Excellent program.
You guys are great. Take care.
ASA all the way.
ASA all the way. Take care. Good night, guys.